Greetings, everybody. Welcome to My name is Pauli Murray Salon. My name is Aria Sa'id. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a co founder and the president of the Transgender District. And I also serve on the board of directors for the Women's Foundation of California. I'm so excited to be in space with you all today and welcome you all for those tuning in to this session. This session is brought to you by, in partnership with the Women's Foundation of California's Culture Change Fund, as well as participant media, excuse me, and Harness. And we have some amazing guests today to sort of weigh in on this incredible moment and legacy of rediscovering and gaining more access and intimacy with Pauli Murray and all the work that they've done to create the civil rights movement and women's liberation movement that we know today. Um, and so, yeah, we have some special guests joining us pretty soon, but just wanted to highlight in particular that Black women, Black non binary people, Black trans people, and Black queer people in particular have been leading the political and cultural work. And as we get ready for the year 2022, midterm, and the 2024 general elections, there's a lot to be proud of, but there's also a lot to plan for by way of interrupting the conservative backlash that we all have experienced in some of the recent elections and the conservative backlash that we all experienced in some of the recent elections and wrangling that took place in the relationship to our nation's infrastructure. And so I want to bring on some of our guests to join in with me in the salon. And so we have Bia Vieira, who is the chief strategist for the Women's Foundation of California. And we also have two special guests, Brittany Bennett Weston and Antonia Randolph, who are both board members of the Pauli Murray Center, where Pauli Murray was raised in North Carolina. Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, if y'all, Antonia and Brittany, if y'all just want to share a little bit to the audience, the work that you all are doing in North Carolina with Pauli Murray Center and their legacy.
All right, Antonia, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm so glad to be here and share the good news of Pauli Murray to people who may be new to their work. I've been part of the Pauli Murray Center's board for about 2 years, and the Pauli Murray Center is dedicated to lifting up the legacy and works of Pauli Murray for the city and also for the world. And one of the ways we do that is through some programming, like an online book club that's really taken off during the pandemic, because people want to gather around the kind of issues that Pauli raised in their life. Uh, and we've done books that are focused on feminist issues, Black liberation, queer issues, which could be unusual for a center of this sort dedicated to a historical figure. So the book club is something that we're really proud of. And we've also been doing a series called Just Conversations that brings together different faith leaders and social justice activists from around the country to talk about the sort of struggles for equality that Pauli was involved in throughout their life. So I'd be happy to talk about that more.
Yeah, and I've been on the board for about 5 years now. I serve on our facilities committee, and so that committee is helping to think about kind of the historic site itself that we hope to open to the public soon. We've gotten some great funding recently that'll help us do that faster, and so you know we're really lifting up Pauli's legacy through the preservation of this place where Pauli was raised, where Pauli's family was and lived and contributed to this community. So when we think about the center, it's the work that we're doing to lift up Pauli's works and legacy through programming like Antonia mentioned the book club, but also other talks, and speaking and teaching around Pauli's works, and then really stewarding this site to think about it as a real tool for community preservation and historical preservation in this historic Black community in Durham that is facing a lot of pressures of gentrification. So, it's about Pauli and it's about community, which I think is very much in line with who Pauli was.
Mhm.
Thank you. I also I'm excited to meet y'all and to celebrate the work that you all are doing at the home that Polly was raised in, their family home. Um, I'm just going to share a little bit of what my experience was in watching the documentary because, to be quite honest, I felt betrayed. Um, and I'm going to start with that headline and let the audience know that if you have not seen the documentary, you absolutely have to see it. It is available to stream on Amazon Prime. And I was telling Bia earlier this week that I had to watch it and pause and go do laundry and then watch some more and then go cook and then watch it and like clean up because it was so much to digest. And the reason why I felt betrayed was because who knew that the probably I mean everyone played a significant role in that era, in that time, and still do today in civil rights for Black people and queer people and women. However, such a pivotal, vital contributor to the civil rights framework and women's rights framework has been invisible, at least for me. I'm like, where in my schooling and in my education did I ever get access to Pauli Murray's legacy? And seeing the documentary, I had this feeling of betrayal. And something that came up for me is how so often, even in our movements for progress, there is a way that the contributions of gender nonconforming people, Black gender nonconforming people, queer people, trans folks is often invisibilized and sort of sanitized. Um, and then years later, we don't know that they played such a vital part. That the Brown versus Board of Education really was based off of Polly's college essay. I believe it was college essay that they sent to their professor, and their professor is like, "Hey, just so you know, we use that." And I remember the professor in the documentary sort of talking about that image of Thurgood Marshall and all the sort of key players at the Supreme Court with the passing of Brown versus Board of Education, and Polly is sort of absent, and that's probably the biggest thing that struck me. And then I think also Polly's sort of non-binary experience, like how would they identify today, is still a question that I think all of us are trying to answer in our own ways. I keep saying they, them pronouns because my own personal comfort, I think as a trans person and sort of seeing their experience in their letters to their doctor, and sort of regarding their gender identity and their experience. But at the same time, and we talked about this a little earlier, you know, Polly was also committed to the liberation of women, and I think was sort of holding both of these experiences in a complicated way, right? That we're allowed to have complicated lives, and something that I thought was brilliant and amazing was seeing that they willed for their literary work, their poetry, and their writings and thoughts to go to, and now the name of the library escapes me. I'm so sorry. I think it starts with an S, but this library that was sort of curating the works of women leaders and so yeah. So Bia, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on your experience in engaging with the documentary?
Sure. Yeah, I think that one of the things that is so incredible about the documentary, but also about Pauli Murray, is that Pauli Murray really told their story themselves. Like everything was documented. There was this way in which they really understood the importance of their life in the sense of documenting what was happening, that I found so um, there is a quality to that that's really important. And I think the other thing is that the language that they use, the ways that they talked about their experiences and their relationships are ways that are very you can feel it. You can feel when they talk about the South, in particular times of the South in the United States. They talk about how it felt in their skin. There's a way in which the thread of their lives and of the movements and the times that they lived in, that really you can feel it, and it's expressed through this very bodily way. And I really thought that was incredible. I thought also the documentary and the filmmakers really did an amazing job being able to lift their experience, their own. It's like this. It's telling this storyteller's story. So much was there, and it was quite an amazing experience, really. As somebody who really didn't know much about Polymory, so I really understand what you were saying, Aria, about feeling betrayed. Um, and I have more to say, but I'm going to wait after Antonia and Brittany share their sense of the documentary.
Well,
Yeah.
Antonia, oh, sorry, Antonia
Go ahead,
or
Aria.
Brittany, I'd love to hear what elements of the film and the documentary spoke to you the most, being that you all sort of have you all do have a daily connection to Pauli Murray's legacy. Um, so yeah, I'm curious to learn more about that.
Where are you gonna go? You can go ahead, Brittany. You're about to jump in.
Sure. Yeah, I was getting excited just hearing the idea of being betrayed. I actually had not really heard much about Pauli until I moved to Durham. There are some murals around town that were created in partnership with the Polymory Center and Polymory Project at Duke. And so when I joined the board, it was a major learning experience for me. And I also wondered, why didn't I know about this person in school? Why they contributed so much? Why am I just learning about them? And so I think the documentary did a really great job of demonstrating just Pauli's tenacity and clarity of purpose and persistence. I think that's something I always take away when I'm reading about Pauli or when I've watched this film. And I think it's so rare to see video and audio or hear audio of Pauli. And so that was really powerful for me. And I think you're right, Bia, that you feel what Pauli is saying when Pauli speaks and writes about their work. And I think just that, similarly, that foresight, that was the conversation my partner and I had when we left the showing here in Durham, was that Pauli had the foresight to document everything and to make sure their legacy would be passed on, and that they got to tell their story, which I think allows us to see Pauli as a whole person in a way that I don't think we do with a lot of sort of civil rights figures or women's rights figures, right? So that's really what sticks with me whenever I think about Pauli.
And yeah, Brittany, to chime in on what everybody is saying, the way that Pauli documented not only their own life, but their families' lives in proud shoes. To take, and that was extraordinary to value the life of um, Black folks from Durham, North Carolina, from Baltimore, Maryland, and decide that it should be saved for posterity for other generations to read in a family history, and then to write their own memoir and Song in a Weary Throat, and then books of poetry. Pauli just seemed unbounded in a way that would still be shocking today. Um, I was fortunate to have heard of Pauli Murray. I went to Spelman College, and we had the Women's Center at Spelman College under the leadership of Dr. Beverly Guy Shefdahl. There was a class that I took on Black feminist thought after Dr. Shefdahl had just published the book Words of Fire, and it has an essay by Pauli Murray about Jane Crow, about that idea of the intersection of being a Black and a woman where the law doesn't capture that. And so one of the forerunners to intersectionality is Pauli Murray's writing about Jane Crow. But certainly before the point of me going to Spelman, I hadn't heard of Pauli Murray, and I felt so fortunate to have heard of her. So when I came to Durham and found out they had a Pauli Murray Center and saw the murals all around the town, it just made me want to stay here, and it made me know that I was in the right place. For me, one of the things that jumps out in the movie is just that intersectionality. Like Pauli Murray was on the front lines of so many. They're at the turning points of so many important moments in multiple struggles for civil rights, as Aria just said about Brown versus Board of Education, but also one of the founders of National Organization of Women. It's one of those. It is like what is that movie with Tom Hanks where he pops up in these important historical events?
I forgot, but yes, and
yeah, that Pauli Murray is just that person keeps turning up at every historical turning point.
Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump.
Yeah. It was just at a certain point, it was like, how can Pauli be in all these places? Because and the other thing that I thought, and also the movie doesn't talk so much about their work and labor struggles, but that was what their start. Their start was working to make sure poor people were able to get their rights. So all the kind of important struggles of the late 20th century, they were there. And the final thing that's really stuck with me about the movie, which speaks to the boundlessness, is their impatience with the way things were. Who would have thought some person from Durham would write to the University of North Carolina and demand to be admitted to the grad program when they hadn't admitted women before? But for Pauli, it was like, this is past due. This should happen yesterday. And in the 50s and 60s, for Pauli to making those demands is still extraordinary. So the impatience about injustice, still speaks to our current moment.
And then their relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt also really surprised me. The fact that they were sending these letters quite frequently to the president and to Eleanor Roosevelt, and then the president never responded, right? I believe. But Eleanor Roosevelt responded, and I think for Eleanor or Miss Roosevelt, excuse me, to be so celebrated for her legacy in terms of progress. I was surprised at her initial correspondence with Pauli, which was just, change takes time. There's a lot more, Negroes should basically be happy that XYZ, XYZ. And Pauli was not having that. Pauli was like, oh no, we're gonna actually engage in conversation, and in which I'm holding you all accountable for the seat that you all play in American society right now, and how you all are silent, like with the riots and what have you. Like, I was fascinated by that. Are there any surprises that came up for folks in the documentary?
I'm not sure it was a surprise, but it was, I think that hearing the letters that she sent to the doctors and the letters about her internal struggles and depression, and how much they really struggled and suffered, with at a time which, even today, that at a time when the words had not caught up yet in some ways to folks' experiences. I think that the depths of the pain, I think that came across for me about Polly's experience. But also, I think the other thing maybe surprising, but also understandable, was also the generational challenges and tensions that happened between Poly, specifically in the 60s and 70s, with university students, with Black students who wanted things in different ways, and she really couldn't really understand it, and what happens in those moments of tension in generations, when in movements, that when you're trying to be together and you are together, but then there are these ways in which you are experiencing things so differently.
Because they went from being sort of super radical, right? Super progressive, super radical. And then sort of in the 60s and 70s as a professor, they showed those scenes of Polly sort of going into the classroom and saying the word Negro. And the students at that time were like, oh, that's not the term we want to use. And then they started going so much as to sort of protest Polly and call them an Uncle Tom. That was a huge surprise for me. Like, it was such a, I don't know, juxtaposition, contrast. I don't know what word to use, but I was like, isn't it interesting how time changes, and then, our elders in movement work um are grappling with, a new generation of emerging ideas and ways of thinking, inspired by their work, right? But now have a different vantage point to civil rights and movement. And so, they really struggled with they felt like Polly was too stuck in the past. And I thought that was really fascinating, because they still were this like Renaissance person where they're like, okay, now I'm going to be a priest. Like, I was in law, legislation, policy, civil rights, and like now I'm over here and like now I'm teaching. Okay, now I'm going to, be a priest. Another surprise element that I had was that so few people knew directly about their queerness.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me as a trans woman, it feels like um, everyone knows before I even disclose at this point in my life. I also am visible in my work, so I think that it's like the two of them together. But often as a trans person, you really feel like you're in a fishbowl experience where everyone's sort of gawking and staring at you, and you sort of move through your life in that way. At least that's been my experience, and sort of seeing that many people who knew Polly and were very close to Polly also were like, Polly never talked about it. And it brought complicated feelings for me, but I also realized that they were a product of their environment and time, an era of society where I was telling Bia actually, like I could only imagine being in that time and already, with this idea of Jane Crow and sort of the double consciousness of being Black and, woman, female bodied, like to, and being so limited because of both of those things, the idea of adding queerness or non-binary experience or transness or gender non-conforming sort of expressions on top of that would sort of be like a social suicide, for lack of a better term. And so that was, but I was really surprised that even people super, super close to Polly couldn't directly tell you. They're like, we just knew, but like it was never brought up.
And I think that's so true, Aria. And I think that speaks to Bia's point about the loneliness and depression they felt
Mhm.
because they were so public and they were so defiant in these particular ways in movement, but they had to keep things that were really defining about themselves to themselves. And I can only imagine for someone who was as sensitive as Pauli was, because they wrote this poetry, um, it must have been such an internal struggle about, or it must have been painful at least to sort of have this really public persona on the front lines of so many things, but have to be silent about who they loved and also about um, some deep truths about their identity in terms of sex. Um, so, and it's heartbreaking, really, about how much Paulie had to live multiples live as multiple selves in their lifetime. But it's also telling that they kept all that information in the records and made it available to
Mhm.
the public. And so they were imagining a future where that could all be spoken. And I think that's the gift of Collie's life, was that they didn't, you know, didn't erase that from the record. Couldn't do it in public when they were alive, but they made it available for all of us to kind of to witness.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hold that sort of tension when we think of Polly. And I know in a lot of our board conversations we talk about kind of wholeness as a theme from Polly's life, and I think in terms of all of the different parts of Polly that showed up in their life and work, and then having to keep this part of themselves, their identity, an important
Mhm.
part of their identity, secret. Um, and I think though that probably fueled a lot of their creative writing, as Antonia mentioned, writing poetry and being able to express their sensitivities and sadness around different parts of their lives, but also the ways that their faith grounded them in a way that I think was an important um, was an important part of Polly's life, because it helps them kind of move through the world in a way that helped them kind of find some peace and grounding, in spite of all of the other kind of pressures they were experiencing.
Yeah. For those tuning in, we want you to weigh in it just as well. If you all have questions, comments so far along, please feel free to send us comments, and we will engage with those comments and questions and ideas in the salon live. Um, for each of you, although I do have a question, which is very simple. And, now that so many more people, because of this documentary, and because of the work that you all do specifically at the Polymory Center, and, expanding and maintaining their legacy and ensuring that more people have access to Polymory. How would you all, each of the panelists, how would you all say your work is connected to Polymory's legacy? And we'll start with Bia.
Sure. Well, I think that our work at the Women's Foundation of California, and particularly the work that we're doing with Culture Change, with the Culture Change Fund, is really to connect, to understand that a lot of our work is to believe and create and co-create a world where there is justice, there is gender, racial, and economic justice, and that we do that through the policy work that we do, which Aria can talk a little bit about our policy program. But it's also because as Polymory, as we see with Polymory and Polymory's work, that the policy work and the movement work is really important, but the cultural piece, which is kind of what holds us all together, needs to move with all of this and sometimes ahead of it. So in some ways, Poly was culturally ahead of where the country was, and we are catching up with it. And at the same time, we need laws, we need movement folks to continue to push for this world that we believe that we can create, that we can live in, which is a world in which there is justice and fairness and a way for us all to thrive, right? And I think that with the foundation and the Culture Change Fund, that's really what we're trying to do, is how is it that we continue to support the movement building, policy work, but push a little harder on the cultural piece as well, because that really is where it sticks. And, as we're seeing with all the laws that are coming up, anti-bathroom laws and the abortion laws and all of the things that there's some rights are in the books, but we're still fighting for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just Pauli Murray's legacy probably has resonated with me more than any other civil rights leader so far. There's just a way that I'd never had such a direct connection. Maybe, of course, Bayard Rustin, and James Baldwin, right? Queer icons, trans leaders, of course. But with Polly, there's just a way like that they did their work with such conviction, and fervor, and sort of went against the grain of the times to get things to happen. And at baseline, I think the biggest motivation behind their work was simply that humans living on the planet deserve to have equal rights, at baseline. And so I think of that in terms of today. This week is Transgender Awareness Week, and it's a week that we sort of raise awareness on the social issues that impact us, as trans people. And I think there are over 200 anti-trans legislation pieces that have been introduced to the legislature across the country. And the violence against trans people continues, both domestically in the United States, with over 46 trans people having been murdered since January, and in 375 trans people having been murdered globally this year since January. And nearly, I think it was, someone told me this morning, nearly 4,000 trans people have been murdered in the last 10 years. And so you have to remember, we are a very small population on the planet. And so even though there's a way that people have grown more comfortable in seeing us on television and, out and about, it's not like you're seeing 300 trans people like every day marching through the streets of San Francisco or New York or wherever you are. And so fighting for our equality and our right to simply exist as we are and be equal is what resonated with me, and seeing the documentary and gaining access to Pauli Murray's legacy and thinking about that, and sort of it re-inspired me in the work that I am very lucky to do. And so sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna just follow up on that in terms of what you're talking about in terms of violence against trans people really resonated with me about why the Pauli Murray Center is so important, because there's so few. I don't know if there are any historical sites, designated historical sites dedicated to transgender people or gender nonconforming people. And so just the fact that we have a Pauli Murray Center named after a Black person, a gender nonconforming person, possibly a trans person, is a way of fighting for trans rights. I would say this is something that is recognized by the National Historic Registered places. And I think it's so important in our own backyard in North Carolina. The Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, a Black man who's been running off of homophobia and transphobia. And that's important to say that in terms of why the Pauli Murray Center is important right now, where one of the ways that women's rights have been undermined, queer rights have been undermined, is by running off of transphobia and homophobia, and that is rearing its head again in North Carolina. And the Pauli Murray Center doesn't officially do programming about political things, but the fact that the center exists and we acknowledge the wholeness of who Pauli Murray was is a bulwark against the sort of thing that Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson is running on. So I just wanted to echo what you were saying, Aria, and underline how distinctive the Pauli Murray Center is and why it's important in this particular political moment.
Mm-hmm. And thinking about the ways that the center can be a model for other sites, because we know they exist, right? I do think, Antonia, maybe I think the Stonewall Inn is a historic site.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
but
I think
a handful.
Yeah, there's a very small number. There's only 2% of all the sites registered on the historic register that recognize Black people, and less than that, a fraction of that are queer folks, right, and trans folks. So.
Yeah.
We have a question, some questions coming in from the audience that I think would be great to pepper in to this salon experience. And so thanks, folks, for sharing your questions and comments. Feel free to continue sharing questions as they come to you. But one question we have is, what would you like future films about Pauli Murray to do differently than this film?
That's a great question. I had a chance to interview one of the filmmakers, Julie, and I asked her what, with Pauli Murray, it's almost impossible to make a short film, right? There's so much material. And she said that, in fact, that was the problem, not the problem, but the challenge, that there's so much material. But I really wanted to, even though I really wanted to hear a lot more about her writings, her poetry, it's peppered in there, but you don't really go deep in it. But that, I think, would be great.
I think for me, I have an idea.
Okay,
I'm kind of scared to share it with y'all, but I have this idea of like a good biopic, like a good one, like starring India
Who would play?
Moore,
Yeah, like
right?
ooh.
I think India Moore could play Pauli Murray, right? Especially because India has shaved their head. And,
that's right, that haircut. Yeah,
that's what just came
right?
to mind.
Yes.
And so, I'm thinking like heritage, boxy, like, plaid tweed blazer, like what is it, pocket watch. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm thinking like the big glasses. I could see starring India Moore as Pauli Murray, and I would love to buy the biopic to sort of explore more deeply Polly's queerness in like sort of their romantic way, but also from their point of view, being this thought leader and sort of giving birth to a framework of civil rights movement, and then sort of knowing that they have the foresight that their legacy will sort of resurface, but knowing that they're also at the same time being erased in a patriarchal society, right? Even by their own people, like other Black folks, right? And like seeing their upbringing. They talked about Polly. Much of Polly's family passed for white. And so right after the Pauli Murray documentary, I also watched the Netflix piece that was Passing, and just thinking about that experience, and I've known people who've had that experience, elders, Black elders, and all those things. Like, and so I think a really juicy biopic, it's got to be juicy. There's got to be some drama in there, like all from Polly's experience, like um, something that me and some friends and I were chatting about was the way that they would sign their letters with the little 007 with the little glasses.
I
And
love
like,
you.
I would love to see that as a theme in a biopic. And it's no shade, but it can't be like a Lifetime biopic. It has to be like a HBO type of not plugging. Anyways, it has to be like a really well resourced, like good acting. No shade. It's no shade. um so we have some more. Oh, does anyone else want to add in what they would like to see from future films and representations of Polly that might be different than the documentary?
The one, Bia and Ari, you hit a lot of the points that I was thinking of. But the other thing that I thought of is, Polly spent some time in Ghana, I think a university in Ghana. So to show, show that connection with West Africa more, and that experience seemed to be a mixed bag for them. So just to explore, American expatriate, going back to the homeland sort of thing, themes.
And then being surveilled by the government of Ghana
Yes.
as like a rebel route. Juicy. See, just what a well-lived life. My goodness.
Yeah, I think
Brittany?
I'd also be interested in seeing more about Polly's family life and time in Durham. I think Polly took the time to write a whole book about her family, her grandparents, and proud shoes. So, yeah, I'd be curious to even see to go back before Polly was born to think about how her family came to be, especially since Polly's grandma was so proud of her lineage. And yeah, I'd be curious to explore that part and how that came up in their family. Just also knowing what was happening in Durham when Polly was young, in terms of Black Wall Street and this kind of rise in Black business and Black community and wealth that also existed within Polly's family too. So I'd love to see something that brought in that connection.
Yeah. We have another question coming in on the hotline. I'm just kidding. And someone says, I am a Durhamite. I hope I said that right. I'm a Durhamite. How can I help Pauli Murray Center in their mission and also help folks become more aware about Polly and their legacy?
Yeah. I mean, this is a great time to ask that. We're going into our end of year fundraising, and just thinking about opening the site. As I mentioned, we have gotten some great funding, and still need to think about sustainability beyond getting open. So as much support as we can get in that way is always helpful. And then, continuing to spread the good news of Polly. I think, we all see ourselves as kind of disciples of Polly, and connecting with our programming, join a book club or any of the things that we are doing here locally, and hope to see you at the site once it's open.
Amazing. I would love to follow up on that, Brittany and Antonia, with with the site sort of opening. Is there a grand opening scheduled? And like, how can we get involved after the opening, like day to day, like programming and whatnot?
Yeah, so it's not yet scheduled. So TBA on that. Stay tuned. hopefully we'll be able to get a hard date at some point in the nearest future. Um, yeah, I think right now we're in an amazing spot to be able to really dream about what the center will be on the day to day, as we're
Mhm.
moving from this sort of incubator period, housed at Duke, and really getting to kind of grow our programming and bring more people in and have small exhibitions and things in the house, and in the kind of larger site. So stay tuned, Aria. We will definitely be sharing ways that you can engage with the center once it's open.
Thank you, Brittany. And the website for
Big
the
Jasmine.
Polymory Center should be running across your screen right now. And it's through that website, y'all, that you all can engage more with the historic preservation work that they are leading and preserving the childhood home of Polly, and also, continuing the work of sharing their legacy to the local community and the national community. But it's also where you all can consider donating, especially for Christmas. I'm sure you all can do tax deductible donations. And the Polymory Center, while there's sort of seed funding, as Brittany was sharing, for the ramp up period of their grand opening soon coming, there's always a need to sustain sites and spaces like these. And so that website link is down below. And so running across the screen. So please be sure to bookmark that on your Google Chrome. Um, and if y'all would like to also answer another question that came in, which is, are there books? Hold on, are there books you recommend for those of us wanting to learn more about Polymory? And so, Brittany, you were talking about the book that Polly wrote about their family. What was the title of the book?
Proud Shoes. Um, and I saw in the chat someone was asking if there were any shorter works. So definitely, Dark Testament, the book of poetry. Antonia, the professor. I will wonder if you have any recommendations for any other readings.
Yeah, I mean, Proud Shoes is what came to mind, and Dark Testament is probably shorter because it's a book of poetry. So those are writings by Pauli Murray. There's something else you might be able to read is Brittany Cooper wrote a book about Black women activists in general, and there's a section about Pauli Murray. So there's a book chapter within Brittany Cooper's book. So that could be a shorter reading, and that you can do about Pauli Murray. And plug for the book club, because the online book club, which is available to anyone anywhere, you can just go online. You go to the website for the Pauli Murray Center. You'll find under the Engage tab, you can find a link to the online book club. We just did we did that chapter from Brittany Cooper's book about Pauli Murray's life. And so that the book club, if you go to the online book club, we sometimes do books by Pauli Murray. And so that's a great way to get into readings about Pauli Murray with other people who are interested in their works, in their life. So that would be another one that I would recommend. So the chapter by Brittany Cooper. There's also a book by Patricia Bell Scott called The Firebrand and the First Lady, which is about those letters that Ari was talking about between Pauli Murray and Eleanor Roosevelt. And that's just a fascinating way to think about the presidency, about friendship between people from different generations. So I highly recommend that book by Patricia Bell Scott, The Firebrand and the First Lady.
There's also Participant Media did did a study guide for the documentary that is quite good. I really recommend it. And if you signed up, of course, if you're here and you register for the salon, we can share the link to the study guide. It's really very well done.
We have another question coming in. Actually, we have a double question. So two folks have now asked this question, but do we know if Pauli Murray had a California connection? specifically?
Yes, Pauli went to law school here in
Berkeley.
California at Berkeley. Yeah, yeah.
I
Pauli
was
got a
gonna say,
yeah,
right, when that
yeah.
question came in, I'm like, I swear I saw something about that. And dive, they didn't do like a deep dive in the documentary on their time at
No,
Berkeley.
yeah, because Pauli has lived too many
Um,
places to really to do
okay.
sections about every place that Pauli had lived. Yeah.
And she worked in California as well. Didn't she work as an assistant DA?
I think so. So I think they went. So they got a law degree at Harvard Law. Harvard misspoke. Howard, the other H law school, Howard Law, um, and then thought they were going to be able to get a position at Howard Law as a law professor. That did not come through. So went to Berkeley in order to get a further law degree. So they already had a law degree from Howard and a different kind of law degree from Berkeley. And then somebody
Mm,
said there was an opportunity to become an assistant DA at Berkeley, and I don't know if that even came. So there was a lot of um, open doors that turned closed doors for them in their law career.
right. They had the master's in legal studies after becoming a JD, right?
Mhm. And they went to
Exactly.
Berkeley, and then
From
they
Berkeley.
also went to Yale.
Yale for the PhD.
Mm,
Yeah.
come through. Um, well, I think those are the questions that I think we touched on, we did have a question from the audience about Polymurray's gender identity being complicated. And I think we touched on that. And yeah, well, to our audience tuning in to Facebook and YouTube on the Women's Foundation of California's platforms, we want to thank you so much for tuning in and engaging with Polly Murray's legacy in this way through this salon. It's been a lovely hour with you all, and very exciting to finally sort of share these experiences and feelings that came up for me in particular with the documentary, and just very grateful that we now have the streamlined access to the work of Polly Murray and their legacy as a person. And so want to give very special thanks to Brittany Bennett Weston and Antonia Randolph of the Polly Murray Center in Durham, North Carolina. It's North Carolina, right?
Yes.
Look at me, geography. I need more coffee. Excuse me. But thank you all so much for taking the time out today to share with our audience for the Women's Foundation of California and sharing the work that you all do. Thank you to the Culture Change Fund um, and Participant Media and Harness for creating this space in this salon and co-partnering on this and giving us a chance to really sort of sink our teeth into this incredible piece of art, this documentary that so many of us just again having access is so key. And so thank you all so much. If you would like to consider making a donation to the Pauli Murray Center, please consider doing so, especially as the holiday seasons come around. And please consider in the future engaging with the center in the space. Again, as someone at the transgender district that works in historic preservation of sites and spaces that belong to us, we have to cherish them and we have to protect them so that the next generation and the generation after that, they have access to this legacy and whatnot. And so again, thank you all so much for tuning in. We are going to sign off, but hoping you all have a lovely, lovely evening.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Aria.
And also want to highlight that Polly's birthday is this weekend, and the center always celebrates with the party. This year we have some Zoom options that I think people can also join, even if they're not here in Durham. So that's one other way for you to engage with the center and
Yes,
celebrate.
and wait, can they can they register through the website?
It's on our website. Yes, there are
And like
registration
Facebook,
links.
Instagram?
Uh-huh. So that we dropped the link to the website, and if you go to engage, and there's birthday under there, and it has all of the details for Pauli's 111th birthday celebrations.
Wow. This has been amazing, y'all.
Thank you. It has been.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.